The night my husband tried to end our marriage was the night I stopped being the quiet, forgiving wife he thought he owned. I still remember his face, half twisted in anger, half pale in fear, when I told him I knew the truth about his fortune. His words were sharp like knives. "You should never have snooped, Margaret. This marriage is over." He thought he was in control, but little did he know, I had been preparing my own move. The moment I revealed what I did next, he staggered backward, eyes wide, hands trembling like a man who had seen a ghost. For the first time in our marriage, he was the one afraid. And just when he thought he had cornered me, I turned the tables. My action shocked him so much he nearly dropped his phone on the tiled floor. His jaw hung open and he whispered, "You wouldn't dare." But I did. That was the moment everything changed. Before I tell you how I pulled it off, let me take you back to where it all began. When I was still a wife who trusted her husband, and my life seemed simple, quiet, and safe. When I first met Richard, he was a charming man in his late 30s. Tall, confident, with a smile that could melt a frozen heart. He didn't have the kind of money he later flaunted, at least not in those early days. He owned a small logistics business. At least, that's what he told me, and I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? He spoke with such conviction, and he treated me like a queen. I thought I had found a man who would walk through fire for me. In those early years, life was modest but full of laughter. We lived in a small rented house with squeaky doors and cracked walls, but it felt like a palace because love made everything glow. He would come home in dusty boots, kiss me on the forehead, and say, "One day, Maggie, I'll build you a house so big you'll get lost in it." I would laugh and say, "I'll settle for a kitchen that doesn't leak when it rains." But then something shifted. Almost overnight, Richard's fortunes changed. One day he was complaining about fuel prices for his delivery trucks. The next he was driving home in a brand new black SUV. He said a big contract had come through. I clapped my hands and praised him, thinking God had answered our prayers. Suddenly, we moved into a grand house with marble floors and chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. Clothes, jewelry, expensive dinners, all became part of my life. At first, I was swept away by the blessings. Who wouldn't be? But as months passed, little cracks appeared. Richard became secretive. He would disappear for days on business trips, and come back smelling of perfume I didn't own. He started locking his phone, speaking in hushed tones, and hiding documents in drawers I wasn't allowed to open. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and found him whispering on the phone in the study. When I asked who it was, he snapped, "Business. Go back to bed." His eyes were cold. Nothing like the man who once tickled me until I laughed so hard I cried. Suspicion gnawed at me like rats in the dark. Where exactly was this money coming from? Logistics alone couldn't explain the luxury. And why did he always look tense, as if shadows were chasing him? The turning point came one afternoon when I was cleaning the study. He had forgotten to lock the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, I found envelopes stuffed with cash, foreign currencies, not just dollars but euros and pounds too. Alongside them were documents bearing names of people I didn't recognize, contracts written in codes, and worse, letters suggesting dealings with dangerous people. My hands shook as I flipped through the papers. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst through my chest. I wanted to close the drawer and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But curiosity, mixed with fear, chained me to that chair. That was when I knew Richard's wealth was no blessing. It was a curse dressed in gold. Still I kept quiet. Who would believe me? And how could I confront him without proof of what those papers really meant? I told myself to wait, to watch, to gather more. But waiting came at a cost. Richard grew cruel. He no longer spoke to me with warmth. Instead, he barked orders. If I questioned him, he would slam his fist on the table and glare at me until I trembled. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. Then came the night everything exploded. It was a cold evening. Rain lashed against the windows like angry fists. Richard came home earlier than usual, but his face was twisted with rage. He threw his wet coat on the sofa and stared at me with eyes that burned. "You've been digging, haven't you, Margaret?" he snarled. My throat went dry. He knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered. "Don't play games with me," he shouted. slamming his fist on the dining table so hard the glasses rattled. "You went through my study. You found the documents. Do you think I'm stupid?" Tears welled in my eyes. "Richard, I just want the truth. Where is all this money coming from? Who are you dealing with?" His laugh was bitter, hollow. "The truth. The truth will destroy you. But since you're so eager to know, here it is. I'm not the man you thought I was. This marriage, it's over. You'll keep your mouth shut or you'll regret it." He thought he had cornered me. He thought fear would silence me. But he didn't know I had already made my move. I looked him in the eye, wiped my tears and whispered, "You're too late, Richard. I've already." And that was when his face drained of all color. His lips trembled. "No, you wouldn't dare." But I had dared. What I revealed next made him stagger back, as if the ground had opened beneath him. For the first time in his life, Richard was the one on the losing side. Richard's lips trembled as he stared at me, his strong hands suddenly weak, his voice reduced to a whisper. "No, Margaret. Tell me you didn't." I stood my ground, though my knees were shaking inside. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. But I refused to show fear. This was the man who had vowed to love me, protect me, and cherish me. Now he was a stranger, a dangerous stranger, who thought I'd cower at his threats. But he underestimated me. "I already made the call," I said slowly, my voice steady, deliberate. "Everything you've been hiding. It's no longer a secret." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Even the rain beating against the windows seemed to pause, as if the whole world was waiting for Richard's response. His face went pale, his jaw clenched, and his fists tightened until the veins bulged. He looked like a man whose empire was about to collapse. "You wouldn't dare," he muttered, though his voice cracked. "You wouldn't dare destroy everything I've built." "I'm not the one who destroyed it," I replied firmly. "You did. The moment you chose lies over your family, the moment you dragged us into danger." Richard staggered backward, bumping into the table. The fear in his eyes told me everything. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He had built his fortune on secrets, but he had never expected his quiet wife to have the courage to expose him. But just as I thought I had the upper hand, Richard's face twisted into something darker, something I had never seen before. He leaned closer, his voice low and menacing. "If you think you can walk away from this alive, you're a bigger fool than I thought." Those words sent a shiver down my spine. For the first time I realized how much danger I was truly in. This wasn't just about money or lies anymore. My life was at stake. That night sleep refused to visit me. I lay awake in our big empty bed, listening to Richard pacing downstairs, his footsteps heavy and restless. I knew he was planning something. I just didn't know what. But let me take you back, because to understand how I found the courage to stand against him, you need to know the journey that led me here. After I discovered the envelopes of money and strange documents, I lived in silent fear for weeks. Every time Richard left the house, I would search through his drawers, his suit pockets, even his car. Each time I found more things that didn't add up. Fake passports, SIM cards, coded notes scribbled on paper. He wasn't just hiding wealth, he was hiding a life I knew nothing about. I started keeping a small notebook of my own. Every detail I found, every date he lied about, every suspicious phone call. It became my secret weapon, tucked away in a box beneath old clothes in my wardrobe. At first it was just for my own sanity, but slowly the idea formed. If Richard ever turned on me, I needed something that could protect me. But gathering evidence was risky. One night, I nearly got caught when he walked in unexpectedly while I was flipping through his briefcase. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the papers. "What are you doing?" he barked, eyes narrowing. "I was just looking for a pen," I lied, forcing a weak smile. He stared at me for a long moment, suspicion burning in his eyes. Then he snatched the briefcase, shoved it under his arm, and stormed upstairs. That night, he locked the bedroom door from his side of the bed. It was then I realized something chilling. Richard no longer saw me as his wife. He saw me as a threat. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't stay silent. But who could I trust? Friends? Family? No. If Richard discovered I had spoken, they might become targets too. In the end, I made the boldest choice of my life. I reached out to someone Richard would never suspect. It was Detective Harris, an old schoolmate of my brother's who had once told me, "If you're ever in trouble, you can always call me." I hadn't spoken to him in years, but desperation makes you remember old promises. Using a secret phone I bought with cash, I dialed his number. My hands shook as I explained everything. The money, the documents, the strange passports. At first, he didn't believe me. "Margaret, are you sure? Do you know what you're saying?" "Yes," I whispered. "I have proof. And if anything happens to me, I need you to know who is behind it." That call was the beginning of the storm. Back in the present, with Richard's threats still echoing in my ears, I realized I had lit a fire I could no longer put out. He knew I had betrayed his trust, and I knew he was capable of anything. The house that once felt like a dream now felt like a prison, each corner hiding shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. The next morning, Richard acted as if nothing had happened. He sat at the table in his tailored suit, sipping coffee, reading the newspaper. His calmness was worse than his rage. It was the silence before the strike. "Good morning, Margaret," he said casually, not even looking at me. I forced a smile, though my stomach churned. "Morning." He folded the paper neatly, set it aside, and gave me a long cold stare. "We'll be having guests tonight. Be ready." My heart skipped. Guests? At a time like this? But I knew better than to ask questions. I simply nodded, though dread tightened my chest. That night, when the doorbell rang, I nearly dropped the tray I was carrying. 3 men walked in behind Richard, their faces stern, their eyes sharp. They didn't look like friends. They looked like men who dealt in secrets and fear. As I served drinks with trembling hands, I caught fragments of their conversation. Shipments, routes, deadlines. It was the language of crime, whispered behind closed doors in my living room. Then one of the men glanced at me and said, "Does she know?" Richard's eyes flicked to me, then back to them. He gave a tight smile. "She knows nothing. She's just my wife. Just my wife." The words cut deeper than a knife. In that moment, I realized Richard didn't just want to control me. He wanted to erase me. I excused myself, went upstairs, and locked the bedroom door. My hands trembled as I pulled out my notebook and the spare phone. I typed a message to Detective Harris. "He's meeting dangerous people in my house. Please hurry." I hit send and prayed. But before I could catch my breath, there was a loud bang on the door downstairs, followed by shouting. The men were yelling, Richard's voice rising above theirs, and then, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. I froze. My worst fear had come true. And that was the moment everything spiraled out of control. The sound of that gun sent ice through my veins. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to catch every word. The men downstairs were shouting over each other, voices laced with anger and fear. Then Richard's voice cut through, deep and commanding. "Put it down. We don't solve problems in my house." But the reply came sharp, like the crack of a whip. "You're the one who messed up the deal, Richard. We're not leaving until we get answers." My blood ran cold. Who were these men? What deal had gone so wrong that guns were now drawn in my living room? I backed away from the door, pacing the room like a trapped animal. My hands shook as I grabbed the secret phone. My fingers flew across the screen. "There's a gun in the house. Please hurry." I hit send to Detective Harris, but even as the message went out, a chilling thought struck me. What if help didn't come in time? Downstairs, the argument grew louder. I heard furniture scrape across the floor, the crash of glass shattering, and then a terrifying silence. Silence can be worse than noise, because it means something has shifted. I held my breath. Then came Richard's voice again, quieter now, almost pleading. "Listen, we can fix this. Just give me 2 days. I'll deliver what I promised." One of the men snarled. 2 days? You think we're fools? You've been stalling. Maybe your wife knows something. Maybe she should be part of this conversation. My blood froze. Footsteps pounded toward the staircase. Panic surged through me. I darted to the wardrobe, pulling out the box where I kept my notebook and evidence. If they came upstairs and found this, it would be the end of me. Quickly, I shoved the notebook into a pillowcase and hid it under the mattress. Then I grabbed the spare phone, turned it off, and slid it into the lining of my shoe. The footsteps grew closer. My door handle rattled violently. Margaret! Richard's voice roared. Open this door now. I stood frozen, staring at the handle as it jerked up and down. Then came the pounding of fists, each thud shaking the wooden frame. Open it, he bellowed again. I clenched my fists, summoning courage I didn't know I had. Leave me alone, Richard. I shouted back, my voice trembling but loud enough to be heard. There was a pause. Then his tone changed, lower, colder. Don't make me break it down. The threat hung heavy in the air. I knew he would do it. Richard was a man who always got what he wanted. And right now, what he wanted was me, silent and obedient. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting around the room for an escape. The window. It was my only chance. Heart pounding, I rushed to it, fumbling with the latch. Rain poured down in sheets outside. The ground 2 stories below slick and dark. Jumping would hurt, maybe even worse than hurt, but staying meant certain death. Before I could decide, the door crashed open behind me. Richard stood there, his suit jacket torn, his face glistening with sweat. Behind him, 2 of the men loomed like shadows. One of them held the gun. For a moment, time froze. Their eyes locked on me, my hands still gripping the window frame. Richard stepped forward, his voice low, almost mocking. Where do you think you're going, Margaret? I swallowed hard, forcing strength into my voice. Away from you. Away from this madness. One of the men chuckled darkly. She's feisty. Maybe she knows more than she admits. Richard shot him a warning glance, but the damage was done. The men didn't trust him anymore. And now I wasn't just his wife, I was leverage. As they advanced into the room, fear clawed at me. I had never felt so small, so cornered. But somewhere deep inside, a fire burned. I had survived Richard's lies, his threats, his cruelty. I wasn't going to let these men decide my fate. I tightened my grip on the window, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, better broken bones than a broken spirit. And then, rain hammered the roof as if the heavens themselves were watching. My fingers gripped the cold metal of the window frame, my heart thundering in my chest. Behind me, Richard and the 2 men moved closer, their shadows stretching across the floor. The gun gleamed in the dim light, its black barrel pointing like a finger of doom. Margaret, Richard said, his voice controlled but tight. Don't do anything foolish. Foolish. That was the word he used when he thought I was weak, when he believed I had no power. But that night, as the rain poured and my life dangled between fear and freedom, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer the silent wife who bowed to his every command. I was a woman fighting for her life. I threw one leg over the windowsill. Gasps filled the room. She's going to jump. One of the men barked. Richard's mask slipped for the briefest moment. Panic flashed in his eyes. He rushed forward, his hand outstretched. Stop. You'll kill yourself. Better that, I shouted, my voice cracking, than to live as your prisoner. And then, before they could reach me, I pushed myself out into the storm. The wind slapped me hard as I fell, my scream swallowed by the thunder. The ground rushed up in a blur of rain and darkness. For a terrifying second, I thought this was it. My story ending on the cold, wet earth. But fate had other plans. I landed with a bone-jarring thud on the garden canopy below. Pain shot through my side, but the thin sheet of metal broke my fall just enough. I rolled off the edge, crashing onto the muddy grass. My vision blurred, but I was alive. Above me, shouts erupted. Richard's furious voice boomed from the window. Find her. Don't let her get away. Adrenaline surged through me. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in my ribs. I ran barefoot across the garden. The mud sucking at my feet, the rain soaking me to the bone. The tall iron gates loomed ahead, but they were locked. My only option was the narrow side alley that led to the main road. I sprinted toward it, every step a battle against the pain. Behind me, I heard the men spilling out of the house, their heavy boots pounding the wet ground. They were faster, stronger, but I had desperation on my side. Desperation gives wings. As I turned the corner into the alley, headlights cut through the rain. A car slowed, its wipers swiping furiously across the windshield. For a moment, hope sparked in my chest. Maybe it was help. Maybe Detective Harris had come. But the car stopped too smoothly, too deliberately. The driver rolled down the window. It wasn't Harris. It was another man, unfamiliar, his eyes sharp as blades. "Get in," he ordered. I froze. Every instinct screamed not to trust him. But the footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. If I stayed, Richard's men would catch me. If I got in, I might be jumping from one trap into another. The man's voice grew sharper. "Now, if you want to live." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the alley. In that flash, I saw Richard himself emerge from the corner, his eyes locking onto mine. He shouted, his voice lost in the storm. And in that split second, I had to decide. Trust the stranger, or face the devil I already knew. I yanked the car door open and hurled myself inside. The man slammed the accelerator, tires screeching as the car shot forward. My body jolted against the seat, my breath ragged. Through the rear window, I saw Richard standing in the rain. His face contorted with rage, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear. As the car sped away, the man glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what you've just gotten yourself into." I swallowed hard, clutching the wet pillowcase still hidden under my arm, the one containing my notebook of evidence. My voice shook as I asked, "Who are you?" The man's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Someone who doesn't like your husband." And just like that, my world spun into another storm I hadn't seen coming. The car sped through the storm like a bullet, rain splattering against the windshield, wipers slashing back and forth in a frantic rhythm. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, drenched, trembling, clutching the soaked pillowcase that hid my notebook like it was my lifeline. The stranger's hands gripped the wheel firmly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He hadn't said much since we left Richard behind in the rain. His silence pressed down on me heavier than the storm outside. Finally, I found my voice. "Who are you?" I asked again, my throat dry despite the rainwater dripping down my chin. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the road. "A friend," he said flatly. I shook my head. "I don't even know your name. Why should I trust you?" "You already did," he replied. "You got into my car." His words stung because they were true. In that moment of desperation, I hadn't cared who he was. I only wanted to escape Richard. Now that I had, the fear came rushing back. What if I had just stepped into another trap? The man sighed, as if sensing my thoughts. "Name's Daniel. Let's leave it at that for now. What matters is this: you're in danger, and not just from your husband." I turned sharply to him, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He tightened his grip on the wheel. "Richard's dealings run deeper than you think. Those men in your house tonight? They're not just business partners. They're dangerous people. If they believe you know anything, they won't stop until you're silenced." My stomach twisted. "So what now? Are you one of them?" His jaw tightened. "No. I've been watching Richard for a long time. He's crossed people he shouldn't have. And you just became the key to everything." "The key?" I repeated, confused. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the car off the main road onto a narrow, winding path that led into the woods. My panic spiked. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded, clutching the pillowcase tighter. "To somewhere safe," he said simply. "Safe." I let out a bitter laugh. There's no such thing anymore. But even as I spoke, exhaustion pressed down on me. My body ached from the fall. My ribs throbbed with every breath, and my mind buzzed with too many unanswered questions. For now, I had no choice but to trust this stranger named Daniel. We drove for nearly an hour, the storm gradually easing into a light drizzle. Finally, he pulled into a secluded cabin tucked between tall pine trees. The place looked old but sturdy, smoke curling faintly from a chimney. He cut the engine and turned to me. "You'll be safe here. At least for tonight." I hesitated, scanning his face for signs of deceit. But his eyes, though hard, held something Richards never did anymore: sincerity. Slowly, I followed him inside. The cabin was simple: wooden floors, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen. The warmth hit me instantly, chasing away the chill that had sunk deep into my bones. Daniel handed me a towel and a blanket. "Rest," he said. "You'll need your strength." But rest was the last thing on my mind. As I sat by the fire, drying my hair, questions spun in my head. Who exactly was Daniel? How did he know so much about Richard? And why risk helping me? When I couldn't bear the silence anymore, I asked softly, Why are you doing this? He sat across from me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. His voice was low, almost weary. Because Richard ruined my life too. The words hit me like a slap. My breath caught. What do you mean? His eyes darkened as he stared into the flames. He betrayed people. People I cared about. Let's just say, I've been waiting for my chance to bring him down. And now with you I finally have it. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. My heart pounded. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just running from Richard. I was now part of something much bigger, something dangerous. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But before I could speak again, Daniel leaned closer, his voice urgent. Tell me, Margaret, do you have anything at all, that proves what Richard's been doing? My hand instinctively tightened around the pillowcase at my side. Inside it was the notebook, filled with weeks of my observations, dates, documents I'd copied, even names I'd overheard. Proof. I hesitated, torn between fear and trust. If Daniel was telling the truth, this notebook could be the weapon he needed. But if he wasn't, it could also be the noose around my neck. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling as I slowly pulled the pillowcase onto my lap. Maybe, I whispered. His eyes followed the motion, sharp and intent. Then we might just stand a chance. At that moment, I realized something life-changing. I was no longer just a victim of Richard's lies. I was now holding the one thing that could destroy him. And that made me both powerful and a target. The fire crackled in the cabin, but no warmth reached the chill that clung to my bones. Daniel's eyes were fixed on the pillowcase in my lap like it contained the crown jewels. His jaw tightened, his voice low but urgent. Margaret, he said, what's inside that bag could change everything. If it's what I think it is, Richard's empire will collapse. I shifted uncomfortably, clutching the pillowcase tighter. Or it could get me killed. Daniel leaned closer. He already tried to kill you. You've got nothing left to lose, except the chance to stop him. His words cut deep. I wanted to argue, to scream that my life was worth more than some crusade against Richard. But the truth sat heavy on my chest. Running would never be enough. As long as Richard's secret stayed hidden, I would never be free. Slowly, I loosened my grip and pulled out the notebook. Its pages were damp from the rain, smudged in places, but the words were still legible. Dates, names, coded notes, everything I had gathered. I handed it to Daniel with trembling hands. He opened it carefully, flipping through page after page. His eyes narrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. This is more than I hoped for. You've done what police informants, even his enemies, couldn't do. You've documented his whole operation. I stared at him, my chest tight. So what now? You give it to the police? To the people he's cheated? Daniel closed the notebook, his face grim. The police can't touch him. He has half of them in his pocket. No, we need to be smarter. We use this to cut him off from his allies. Without them, he's just a man with enemies closing in. I shivered. The plan sounded bold, but dangerous. And what happens to me in all this? Daniel's gaze softened for the first time. You stay alive. That's my job now. His words should have comforted me, but instead they terrified me. Because if Richard knew I was alive, and worse, if he discovered I had handed over proof of his crimes, he would stop at nothing to silence me. That night, I lay awake on the couch, the blanket pulled to my chin, listening to the wind howl outside. Daniel sat by the table, notebook in hand, scribbling notes of his own. His presence should have made me feel safe, but the unease gnawed at me. I didn't truly know him. He said he hated Richard, that he wanted revenge. But what if he wanted the fortune for himself? Sleep finally came, restless and shallow. And with it came a dream. Richard's face, pale and furious, whispering, "You can't hide forever, Margaret. I will find you." I woke with a gasp, my body slick with sweat. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I sat up, straining my ears. Then I heard it. Crunching footsteps outside, moving slowly around the cabin. My blood turned to ice. I crept toward Daniel, who had dozed off in the chair. I shook him urgently. "Someone's out there." He was on his feet instantly, alert. He grabbed a pistol from under his jacket, something I hadn't known he had, and motioned for me to stay quiet. He moved to the window, peeking through the curtains. His expression darkened. They found us. Before I could speak, the cabin door rattled violently, followed by a heavy thud. Someone was trying to break it down. Daniel spun toward me, his voice sharp but steady. Margaret, listen to me. Take the notebook and go through the back. Run into the woods. Don't look back. Fear clawed at my chest. What about you? I'll hold them off. The door shuttered again under another blow. Shouts echoed outside, angry voices demanding entry. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the notebook. Every instinct screamed not to leave him, but I had no choice. If Richard's men got this book, everything would be lost. Daniel shoved me toward the back door. Go. Now. I ran, my bare feet thudding against the wooden floor, my heart hammering. As I pushed open the back door, the cold night air slapped me in the face. I stumbled into the darkness of the woods, clutching the notebook to my chest. Behind me, the cabin door finally splintered with a crash, followed by gunfire. I screamed, but the forest swallowed the sound. Branches whipped at my face as I ran blindly into the night. Every step carrying me further from safety, deeper into the unknown. And somewhere behind me, in that cabin, Daniel was fighting for both of us. The forest swallowed me whole. Each step was a battle, mud sucking at my feet, branches tearing at my arms, darkness pressing in on all sides. My lungs burned as I ran, clutching the notebook so tightly it felt like part of my body. Behind me, gunshots cracked through the night, each one making me flinch. I didn't dare look back. The only thought in my head was survive. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was slippery, and more than once I stumbled, crashing to my knees. Pain shot up my legs, but I forced myself up and kept going. Somewhere behind me, men shouted, their voices growing fainter but still too close. After what felt like forever, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. My body screamed for rest, but I knew I couldn't stop. If Richard's men found me, there would be no second chance. I pressed my forehead to the cold bark, tears mixing with the rain on my cheeks. My mind was a storm of questions. Was Daniel still alive? Had he managed to hold them off, or had I left him to die? The guilt gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. Regret wouldn't keep me alive. Forcing myself up, I stumbled deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, the path less clear. Strange sounds echoed around me. Owls hooting, branches snapping under unseen feet. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. At last I saw a faint glow through the trees. My heart leapt. Light meant people. People meant help or danger. But I couldn't stay in the woods all night. Hugging the notebook to my chest, I crept toward the glow. It turned out to be a small farmhouse, its windows glowing with warm yellow light. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the faint smell of wood fire drifted through the damp air. For a moment hope flickered in my chest. I knocked hesitantly, each tap echoing louder in my ears than the gunshots had. The door creaked open and an elderly woman peered out, her silver hair pulled into a bun, her eyes sharp but kind. She took one look at me, soaked, muddy, trembling, and gasped. "Oh, child. What on earth?" "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I need help." Without another word, she pulled me inside. The warmth of the fire hit me instantly, and I almost collapsed from relief. She guided me to a chair near the hearth, wrapped a thick blanket around me, and handed me a steaming mug of tea. "Drink," she said firmly. "You look like you've seen death itself." I clutched the mug with shaking hands, the heat seeping into my frozen fingers. I wanted to explain everything, but exhaustion tangled my tongue. All I managed to whisper was, "They're after me." The woman's brow furrowed, but she didn't press. She simply patted my hand and said, "You're safe here. No one comes this far into the woods." Safe. The word felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Still, for the first time in days, I let my body relax. The warmth, the tea, the gentle crackling of the fire. It lulled me into a restless sleep. When I woke hours later, dawn light streamed through the curtains. The old woman was still there, knitting quietly in a chair. She smiled when she saw me stir. "You've got a strong spirit," she said softly. Most would have given up. Whatever you're running from, you can face it. Her words struck me. Maybe she didn't know my story, but somehow she saw my struggle. I nodded, blinking back tears. But just as a flicker of peace settled in my chest, a sharp knock rattled the door. Both of us froze. The woman's eyes narrowed. No one visits this early. My heart leapt into my throat. Slowly, I reached for the pillowcase where I had tucked the notebook. I clutched it close, every muscle in my body tense. The knock came again, louder this time. Then a voice. "Margaret. Open the door. I know you're in there." It was Richard. The blanket slipped from my shoulders as my blood turned cold. He had found me. The courthouse was silent, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Reporters crammed the steps outside, their cameras flashing, their voices shouting questions I couldn't hear. But inside, where I stood clutching the battered notebook, the air was thick with tension. Richard sat across from me at the defendant's table, flanked by lawyers in expensive suits. He looked sharp, polished, every inch the powerful businessman he pretended to be. But I could see it, the flicker of unease in his eyes, the faint twitch of his jaw. For the first time he wasn't in control. He leaned forward, his voice low but venomous, so only I could hear. "You think this will save you, Margaret? You think they'll believe you over me?" I didn't answer. I simply placed the notebook on the table in front of the judge. Its pages were stained with rain, some corners torn, but the truth inside was unbreakable. The judge adjusted her glasses, flipping through the first few pages. Her brow furrowed deeper and deeper with each line. Names, dates, transactions. All the evidence of Richard's empire of blood money laid bare. Richard's lawyers objected, protested, scrambled to discredit me. But the truth has a weight that cannot be buried forever. Witnesses came forward. People Richard had wronged, people he thought were too afraid to speak. One by one they confirmed the words in my notebook. Daniel was there too. Alive. He limped into the courtroom on a cane, his shoulder bandaged from the night of the cabin attack. His eyes met mine across the room, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't alone. As testimony piled up, Richard's mask began to crack. His smooth smile faltered, his hands clenched into fists, his voice rose with desperate anger. The man who once seemed untouchable was unraveling before the world. Finally, the judge's gavel slammed down. The verdict was clear. Richard was guilty of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The sentence: decades behind bars. The courtroom erupted in noise, reporters rushing out, murmurs from the crowd, Richard's lawyers shouting empty threats. But all I heard was my own heartbeat. All I felt was the weight lifting off my shoulders, the chains breaking at last. Richard turned to me as guards moved to take him away. His eyes burned with rage, but there was something else there too: shock. "You," he hissed, struggling against the cuffs. "You did this to me." I stood tall, my voice steady. "No, Richard. You did this to yourself." I only stopped pretending not to see it. For the first time, he had no reply. They dragged him out, his shouts echoing down the hallway until they faded into nothing. I sank into my chair, tears streaming freely down my face. Not tears of fear this time, but of release. The battle was over.